They took everything I earned and called it helping the family. Now I'm successful and finally set boundaries. Suddenly, I'm the bad guy. Funny how loyalty only goes one way. The first time the heavy envelope of cash pressed against my trembling palm, I thought I had finally arrived. I was 17, working doubles at a greasy diner where the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions soaked permanently into my clothes, where the linoleum floors were so worn you could see the ghost trails of exhausted feet etched into them. I had dreamed of that money, every shift, every belittling comment from customers who didn't bother to look me in the eyes, every "hey sweetheart" smile more that made me want to scream. I cradled that first hard-earned paycheck like a newborn, like proof that my life could maybe, finally, be different. But before the sun even dipped below the horizon, before I even let myself imagine what little pleasures it could buy, a pair of shoes without holes, a meal that wasn't instant noodles, my mother's voice cut through the brittle air of our crumbling apartment. "We need it," she said, hand outstretched, fingers already curling as if she could will the money out of my grip. "Family comes first, always." There was no room for hesitation, no space for questions, only the thudding, inevitable guilt that rose inside my chest as she rattled off the list. The overdue rent, the electric bill, the groceries dwindling into bare shelves. My dreams were so small then, fragile things easily crushed under the heavy boot of obligation. Without protest, I handed it over, watching my future slip between calloused fingers. It became the rhythm of my existence. Every raise I clawed for, every promotion I fought tooth and nail to achieve, was greeted not with pride, not with celebration, but with heavier demands. "Your sister needs new shoes. Your uncle's car broke down. Your grandmother's roof is leaking." The word "help" was wielded like a weapon, sharp enough to pierce any selfish impulse I might have dared to nurture. It didn't matter that the debts were never mine, that the crises were endless and self-inflicted. I was the solution, the safety net, the bottomless well from which they drank without restraint or shame. At first I told myself it was temporary, that once things were better, once the emergencies stopped, they would stand on their own and let me breathe. But emergencies, I learned, are infinite when they cost someone else. They multiplied like weeds in an unkept garden, thriving on my exhaustion, my self-erasure. And every time I hesitated, every time I dared to dream of keeping something for myself, the refrain came, as reliable as the sunrise. "This is what family does." I moved through my 20s like a ghost, my own wants buried beneath a mountain of other people's needs. Relationships wilted under the constant pressure. Friends fell away when they realized I was always too busy, too broke, too drained to maintain even the most basic connections. Birthdays passed unnoticed. Holidays became battlegrounds of passive-aggressive comments and overt financial demands, thinly veiled as tradition. I was the dutiful one, the reliable one, the one who never said no, and the more they took, the more invisible I became. It was during a particularly brutal winter, when the heat in my apartment had failed, and I was layering sweaters under my coat just to sleep, that the cracks in my carefully constructed loyalty finally began to show. I had just sent my mother another check, this one for a medical bill she swore was an emergency, only to find out she had spent half of it on a new television for her boyfriend. I sat there on my threadbare couch, fingers numb, tears hot and bitter sliding down my cheeks, and I realized they didn't see me. They only saw the resources I provided. My sacrifices were not honored. They were expected, entitled. My humanity was irrelevant as long as my wallet stayed open. Something shifted then, deep and irrevocable. A cold, clear rage took root where guilt once lived. I decided quietly and without ceremony that I would not live the rest of my life as a carcass picked clean by those who claimed to love me. The path to freedom was not a straight line, but a brutal, uphill climb littered with accusations, manipulations, and the relentless gnawing of self-doubt. I learned, painfully, that loyalty without reciprocity is just another form of servitude. I stopped answering every phone call. I started saying no, first in whispers, then in firmer, unapologetic tones. I took jobs that moved me further away, geographically, emotionally, spiritually, from the toxic cycle that had defined my existence. At first, the family pretended not to notice. They called less, asked in more roundabout ways, couched their demands in careful language. But when I refused to cave, when I kept my boundaries firm despite the tidal waves of guilt they sent crashing against me. The true ugliness surfaced. I became the villain overnight. The ungrateful one, the selfish one, the changed one, said with such venom it might as well have been a slur. They weaponized every memory of my childhood, every sacrifice they had ever made, real or imagined, as if that debt could never be repaid, as if my existence itself was a ledger they kept balanced only by extracting more. Funny how loyalty only mattered when it benefited them. Funny how quickly love soured when I stopped bleeding for it. Now I sit in a home I bought with my own hands, with money earned through years of sleepless nights, ruthless budgeting, and stubborn resilience. I drive a car that starts every time. I eat meals I don't have to ration. I sleep without the crushing weight of impending financial doom. I have built a life, a real life, not just an existence of survival, and I guard it fiercely, unapologetically. They don't understand. They don't want to. They see the closed door as betrayal, not liberation. They pound at it with accusations, manipulations, crocodile tears. They demand entry with the same entitlement that drained me for years. But I don't open it. Not anymore. Because I know now. Real love doesn't come with a price tag. Real loyalty doesn't require the destruction of self. And if that makes me the bad guy, so be it. The silence between us was not peaceful. It thrummed with accusations unsaid, vibrated with ancient resentments that no apology could ever salve. When they realized I was not coming back, not crawling home with pockets turned inside out, with hollowed eyes begging for forgiveness they believed I owed them, their silence transformed into something weaponized. The unanswered messages evolved into veiled threats. The missed calls mutated into poisonous rumors that slithered through distant relatives and old family friends, a carefully woven tapestry where I played the ungrateful antagonist. In the beginning, I tried to pretend I didn't hear it, that the scathing comments slipping through the grapevine were mere background noise, static to be tuned out. But lies have a way of sprouting teeth when left unchecked. Stories twisted themselves like vipers around the fragile strands of my new life. That I thought I was better than everyone now. That success had made me cold. That I had forgotten where I came from, as if my roots were shackles instead of soil. Sometimes I wondered how many of them believed their own inventions. It was easier, I realized, to paint me as the villain than to confront the uncomfortable truth that perhaps it was never love they offered me, but dependency, carefully cultivated and ruthlessly maintained. And so they spoke of me in bitter tones at family gatherings I no longer attended, raising their glasses in mock toasts to the one who thinks she's too good for us now, laughter spilling over in brittle, ugly waves, hollow and triumphant in their shared delusion. Meanwhile, I built my life in the stubborn, painful quiet that healing demands. The days blurred into long hours of work and longer hours of self-reflection, excavating the wounds so deeply buried I sometimes forgot they even existed. I learned, slowly and with many missteps, how to enjoy things without guilt gnawing at my happiness like a parasite. I bought a bed large enough to sprawl in, thick with luxurious blankets I would have once considered extravagances, and slept entire nights without waking to phantom phone calls demanding last-minute loans. I allowed myself to linger in bookstores, sipping overpriced coffee, wandering through aisles heavy with promises of other lives, other worlds. I dared to imagine a future that was mine alone. Still, the guilt crept in during quiet moments, insidious and persistent, a lingering ghost from the life I had abandoned. Sometimes I would catch myself reaching for my phone, fingers hovering over the contacts list, the urge to explain, to justify, almost overwhelming. But explanations were currency in a market that only accepted subjugation as payment. Nothing I said would ever be enough. They didn't want the truth. They wanted my surrender. It was during one of these vulnerable moments, a gray Sunday where the rain battered the windows and made the world outside seem unbearably distant, that the letter arrived. No stamp, no return address, just a battered envelope slipped through my mail slot like a secret too shameful to name. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper, the handwriting unmistakable. My mother's. The careful, looping script that once taught me to read fairy tales and grocery lists alike. "You think you're too good for us now," it began. No preamble, no grace. "After everything we did for you, you wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us. Don't forget who sacrificed for you. Family is family, no matter how much money you think you have. I read it once, then again. Each word sliced deeper than the last, not because they were true, but because a part of me still wanted their approval, their love, their impossible acceptance. I folded the letter neatly, placed it back into the envelope, and tucked it into the bottom drawer of my desk. Not to cherish it, to remind myself on the days the loneliness gnawed too fiercely, why I had chosen this isolation. The loneliness, yes, that was the part no one warned you about when you broke free. The vast, yawning spaces where obligation used to live. I filled them as best I could, with friendships built slowly and cautiously, with passions I had once deemed frivolous, with long walks that led nowhere in particular but always ended in a kind of bittersweet peace. I learned that being alone was not the same as being abandoned. It was a lesson written in hard, painful ink across the landscape of my soul. Months passed, seasons turned without acknowledgement from the family I had once bled for. I heard snippets of their lives through the reluctant gossip of mutual acquaintances. Another cousin pregnant, another uncle out of work, another emergency that would have, in the past, resulted in a panicked phone call to me. I felt no triumph in their struggles, no schadenfreude, only a hollow ache, the kind you feel when you recognize a pattern you once believed yourself powerless to break. Then, one evening in late autumn, as I was locking up my small shop, a dream realized through years of saving and hustling, the bell over the door chimed violently, swinging inward with a gust of cold air and even colder intentions. It was my brother, the one who had once sworn he would always have my back, who had borrowed thousands under the promise of someday paying it forward, someday doing better. He stood there, soaked from the rain, jaw tight with fury barely contained beneath the surface. "You can't even return a damn call now?" he barked, not bothering with greetings, not bothering with anything resembling decency. I said nothing. I didn't trust myself to speak. He stalked forward, dripping water onto the polished floor I had painstakingly laid tile by tile during endless late nights. His gaze raked over the modest but well-kept shop, the shelves lined with handmade goods, the soft lighting casting everything in a golden glow. A sneer curled his lip. "Must be nice," he said, voice thick with accusation. "All this, while your family struggles." I swallowed the urge to laugh, the urge to scream, the urge to shake him and demand he see the years of labor, the sacrifices made in silence, the nights spent working double shifts while they partied, while they slept, while they let opportunity rot between their fingers. Instead, I spoke quietly, each word a deliberate stone placed in the wall between us. "I'm not responsible for your choices." His face contorted, disbelief and rage fighting for dominance. "You think you're better than us now? Too good to help your own blood?" I met his gaze steadily, feeling something inside me settle, harden, like steel tempered in fire. "I helped," I said, voice steady. "For years. I gave everything I had, and when I needed help, when I needed support, you turned your back. You called me selfish for wanting to keep a little piece of myself." He opened his mouth, ready with another barrage, but I cut him off. The first time in years I had ever interrupted, ever refused to let their narrative drown me. "You don't get to demand pieces of me anymore. You don't get to decide what I owe." For a moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against the windows, the world outside a blur of water and darkness. Then he scoffed, a bitter sound full of contempt, turned on his heel, and left the door swinging open in his wake. I closed it behind him, locked it, and leaned against the cool glass, heart pounding but clear, sharper than it had been in years. No more explanations, no more apologies. The narrative had shifted whether they liked it or not. In the days that followed, the backlash was swift and vicious. Social media posts dripping with passive-aggressive venom. Messages from distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, demanding to know why I was causing trouble. Invitations to family events sent pointedly without details. A mockery of inclusion I was meant to chase after, beg for. I ignored them all. I poured myself deeper into my life, into the community I was slowly, painstakingly building, one not based on blood, but on mutual respect, on shared dreams and laughter without strings attached. I sponsored local events, mentored younger entrepreneurs who reminded me of the girl I had been, hungry and hopeful and utterly alone. I grew roots in soil I had chosen, not the barren fields I had been chained to.
and somewhere along the way the ache in my chest dulled, the loneliness transformed, no longer a cavernous void.
Reminding me of where I had been, of what I had survived. It never completely went away. Healing, I learned, was not a destination, but a journey riddled with setbacks and small, hard-won victories. Some nights, I still woke gasping from dreams where my mother's voice called me home, dripping with the same saccharine guilt that had shackled me for so long. Some days I still hesitated before buying something nice for myself, a reflexive flinch born of years being told my needs were selfish. But I never opened the door again, not when they knocked with crocodile tears, not when they battered it with accusations, not even when they whispered promises of change they had no intention of keeping, because I had changed. And no matter how much they raged, no matter how they twisted the story, that was something they could never undo. The real betrayal, I realized, was not my boundaries. It was their belief that I was theirs to consume. The final severance did not come in fire and fury as I had once feared. It arrived in something far more devastating: indifference. It had been nearly a year since my brother stormed out of my shop, leaving behind the echoes of accusations and the sour stink of old resentments. A year since the letters stopped, the messages dried up. The passive-aggressive posts became fewer and more desperate, like the final flares of a dying star. A year since I had last looked over my shoulder, half expecting to find a familiar face twisted in anger lurking behind me. Silence had filled the space where obligation once screamed, but instead of fear, it was peace that settled inside me like a long-awaited guest. I had changed my number, moved my accounts, made myself invisible to those who only knew how to reach for me with open palms. Every thread connecting me to the past had been severed, each cut cleaner than the last, until nothing remained but the memories and the lessons carved into my skin like scripture. On an early winter morning, I stood by the front window of my home, paid for by years of sacrifice no one else had ever seen, watching the soft snow descend in languid spirals. There was a quiet there, a kind of sacred stillness I had once thought reserved for other people. Luckier people, people not born into war zones disguised as family dinners. In the stillness, I saw my reflection, faint and flickering against the glass, and I did not see a traitor or a villain. I saw a survivor. The shop had blossomed beyond anything I could have imagined. What began as a desperate grasp at independence had transformed into a thriving community cornerstone. People knew me here. They respected the boundaries I set. Customers came not with demands, but with gratitude, and friendships grew out of small kindnesses exchanged without scorekeeping or expectation. I hosted local artists, organized fundraisers for shelters, taught workshops for young dreamers with calloused hopes and bright, stubborn eyes. In building this life, I had unearthed a truth that had once seemed unfathomable. Family could be chosen. Loyalty could be earned. Love could exist without the heavy chains of obligation. And still, the past had one final card to play. It came not through the mail, not through some backhanded message on social media, but through a knock at my door on a particularly bitter evening when the sky hung low with bruised clouds and the air crackled with the promise of a coming storm. I hesitated only a moment before answering, heart steady, body relaxed. I had survived too much to be easily shaken now. Standing on my porch, hunched against the cold, was my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, not just in body but in spirit. Time had hollowed her out, left her brittle around the edges. In her eyes, the same dark gaze that once pierced me with expectation and disappointment. There was something new now, something almost like fear. "Can I come in?" she asked, voice raw, no longer the sharp whip she once wielded with ease. I stepped aside without speaking, the final remnants of guilt falling away from me like brittle leaves in a dying season. I did not offer her tea, nor a seat, nor comfort. I simply waited. She stepped inside, glancing around with wary eyes, taking in the warm, lived-in space, the photographs on the wall that told stories she would never know. In the quiet that stretched between us, I could feel her struggling, searching for the words that might bridge the chasm she had helped dig with her own hands. "I heard you're doing well," she said finally, voice thin. "I am." Another long silence, heavy with things unsaid. I didn't realize," she began, then faltered, the words crumbling into dust before they could reach me. You didn't want to realize, I corrected, voice calm. You wanted me to stay broken because it was easier for you. The honesty hit her like a blow. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement that I might have once rushed to soothe, but I remained still, allowing her the dignity of her own discomfort. I know we weren't fair to you, she said eventually. Words dragged out of her like teeth. But we needed you. You needed what I could give, I replied. Not me. She opened her mouth, closed it again. Her hands twisted together, the same way mine used to when I was younger, terrified of disappointing a family that only loved me in direct proportion to my usefulness. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice nearly lost to the growing wind outside. The words should have moved me. Once they would have cracked me open, sent me running back into the cycle of giving and giving until nothing was left. But now, I simply nodded. I accept your apology, I said. But that doesn't mean I'll open the door again. Her shoulders sagged under the weight of finality. She had come here hoping, maybe even believing, that an apology would be enough to reset the scales. That forgiveness was the same as surrender, but I had learned too well, too brutally, that forgiveness was a gift for myself, not a reopening of old wounds. I'm not coming back, I said softly. Not to the way things were, not to the person you all expect me to be. Tears welled in her eyes, but I did not move to comfort her. I let her cry, let her feel the grief she had never allowed me. She wiped at her face with shaking hands, and for a brief, flickering moment, I saw the mother I had always wished for, the one who would have fought for me instead of against me. But it was too late. The child in me had grown up and moved on, leaving behind the ashes of impossible dreams. I wish you well, I said, stepping back toward the door, a gentle but firm barrier between us. She hesitated, then nodded, a broken, jerking movement. Without another word, she stepped outside into the swirling snow. I closed the door behind her, feeling the finality settle deep into my bones. I watched her walk down the path, a small figure swallowed by the storm. I did not cry. I did not rage. I simply stood there, breathing in the crisp, cold air of my freedom. In the days that followed, there were no more calls, no more letters, no more last-ditch efforts to reclaim me. I was, finally and completely, free. My life unfolded with a quiet, relentless beauty. I traveled to places I had only seen in magazines as a child, standing on windswept cliffs and ancient cobblestone streets, marveling at the sheer vastness of a world I had once thought beyond my reach. I built a network of friends who loved me not for what I could give them, but for who I was, flaws and all. I nurtured passions long buried under years of survival, painting, writing, the quiet magic of creating something for no one but myself. Every so often, someone would ask about my family. I would smile, a small, secret smile, and say only that sometimes family is not where you come from, but where you choose to belong. There were moments of sadness, of course. Healing is not a straight line but a winding road full of ghosts and shadows. But even on the darkest days, I never regretted the choice to walk away. I never once wished to return to the life where love was a ledger and loyalty a leash. In the end, I did not need their validation. I did not need their permission to live a life of my own design. I had earned my freedom in blood and tears and stubborn hope, and no one could take it from me again. The past was a scar now, not a wound, and every morning as I opened the door to my shop, as I greeted the life I had built with my own 2 hands, I felt the quiet rebellion thrumming in my chest.